In May 2016, three 17-year-old boys from North Carolina set out for what should have been a routine hike along the Appalachian Trail, one of the most scenic spots in the United States. The trail, known for its breathtaking views and tranquil nature, attracts thousands of adventurers each year. For Jackson, Miles, and Connor, however, this journey would end in horror. The boys' car was found in the parking lot, a seemingly normal start to their hike. Their last known photo on Instagram showed a serene sunset from the first evening of their trip, but after that, silence. No more messages, no calls returned, no word from them. It was only days later, when the boys failed to return home, that their families raised the alarm. Authorities sprang into action, sending out helicopters and search teams, but the dense forests, ravines, and countless miles of trail offered no clues. For days they searched the vast expanse of the Appalachian Mountains, but it was as if the boys had vanished into thin air. What had started as a routine hike had taken a chilling turn, leaving behind a mystery that no one could solve. The search for Jackson, Miles, and Connor seemed like something out of a nightmare. As soon as the authorities were alerted to the disappearance of the three boys, a massive search operation was launched. Rescuers, volunteers, and search dogs combed through the thick, rugged terrain of the Appalachian Trail, retracing the boys' steps in a desperate attempt to find any clue, any sign that would lead them back. The search teams scoured the miles of winding paths, steep cliffs, and deep ravines, yet the forest offered no answers. The only hint of their presence was the spot where their car had been found parked at the trailhead, a place where many others had started their own hikes. Despite the vast manpower deployed, nothing surfaced. Not a single footprint, not a torn piece of clothing, and not even a sign of their cell phones. Just an eerie emptiness that seemed to swallow up all evidence of their whereabouts. The search parties moved with relentless focus, their hopes as high as their exhaustion was deep. But the Appalachian Mountains were as unforgiving as they were vast. Helicopters were brought in, hovering over the dense forest canopy, scanning every possible nook and cranny of the mountainous landscape. Search dogs sniffed tirelessly at the base of trees, alongside streams, and through the underbrush. But still, no scent was picked up. Every turn, every ledge was examined meticulously. And yet, for all their efforts, they came up with nothing. The silence grew louder. With each passing day, hope dimmed. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the search continued, but there were still no answers. The families of the missing boys never gave up, continuing to push for the case to stay in the public eye. They made desperate appeals to the media, hoping for someone, anyone, to provide information that could help bring their sons home. But as time went on, the case began to fade from the headlines, slowly slipping into the forgotten corners of the Salman news cycle. It was as if the boys had simply vanished, swallowed up by the mountains that had once promised only beauty and adventure. For the families, the agony of uncertainty was unbearable. There were no answers, no bodies, just unanswered questions hanging like a dark cloud over their lives. The anguish of not knowing what had happened, where their sons were, or if they were even alive, gnawed at them each day. The hope of reuniting with their children, even if it was just to say goodbye, slowly turned into a haunting nightmare that no parent should ever have to endure. Every lead, every tip was followed up with caution and desperate anticipation, only to lead to another dead end. It felt as though the world had forgotten them. As the months stretched on, the search operation dwindled. The number of people involved began to decrease, and the once vibrant search for the missing teens turned into a routine, a bitter reminder of a case that had no resolution. No one wanted to give up hope, yet the truth was becoming painfully clear. The mountains had kept their secrets, and no one could uncover them. The stories of other hikers claiming to have seen the boys on the trail turned out to be little more than hearsay. There were no witnesses, no sightings, no reason to believe that the teens had been anything other than swallowed by the wilderness. The police, too, were at a loss. Their investigation seemed to go nowhere, and as the case grew colder, they began to run out of leads. There were no fingerprints, no forensic evidence, and certainly no bodies to be found. It was as though Jackson, Miles, and Connor had never existed at all. Time passed, and with it, the media lost interest. The families, though heartbroken and desperate, continued searching on their own, but every lead they followed only led them deeper into a void. They turned to private investigators, posted more flyers, and made more calls, but nothing brought them closer to the truth. The frustration of having no answers, of not knowing whether their children were alive or dead, became a cruel, unrelenting weight that the families carried every day. Yet, despite the pain, they held on. They refused to believe that their children had just disappeared into the void. They clung to the hope that one day, somehow, somewhere, someone would know something, anything that could lead to a breakthrough. But as the years went by, their search became not just about finding their boys, but about keeping their memory alive. They were no longer just searching for the living, they were searching for closure, for a resolution, for something that would put an end to the torment of the unknown. But for all their efforts, the answers they so desperately needed were still nowhere to be found. The case grew colder with every passing year, and with it, the realization that they might never know what happened to their sons began to take hold. Yet, even in the face of such despair, the question of what really happened to Jackson, Miles, and Connor was one that would never go away. 5 long years had passed since Jackson, Miles, and Connor disappeared without a trace in the vast and unforgiving Appalachian Mountains. The case had grown cold, with every search effort, every hopeful lead, fizzling out into nothing. Their families, still holding on to the hope that one day their sons would be found, had exhausted every avenue. The media had moved on to the next big story, and the authorities had all but abandoned the case, having found no new clues, no answers. The mountains had swallowed the boys whole, and no one had any idea what had happened to them. But in 2021, the case would take a sudden and unexpected turn. A group of cavers, experienced spelunkers exploring the vast network of limestone caves that stretched through the region, stumbled upon something that would bring the mystery to the surface once more. These caves were not widely known, not a typical tourist attraction, and the entrance to them was concealed, tucked away in a remote part of the Appalachian region. The cave system was treacherous, with narrow passages and jagged rocks, only accessible to those who had the right training and equipment. Most hikers and adventurers would never even think to venture into such dangerous places. It was during their exploration of these caves that the group made a chilling discovery. Initially, they thought they had come across discarded rubbish, perhaps left by other adventurers. But as they approached the object, they realized something was off. It wasn't trash at all. Beneath a pile of rocks they found a tarp, rolled up and weighed down by a large stone. With some effort they unwrapped it, revealing something far more sinister. Inside the tarp were shoes, 3 separate pairs, and fragments of clothing. It wasn't just any clothing either. It was clearly the kind of gear worn by hikers, the kind of items you'd expect a teenager to wear on an adventurous hike. The shoes were all placed neatly beside each other, as though someone had taken them off carefully and arranged them. The clothes, though torn and weathered by time, seemed to have been folded with an odd sense of order. But there was something missing. There were no personal belongings, no backpacks, no phones, no identification, just the clothes and shoes, no bodies, no sign of the young men. It was almost as if someone had carefully staged the scene, hiding the true nature of what had happened. The cavers, realizing the importance of their find, immediately reported it to the police. They knew that they had stumbled upon something far beyond a simple discovery in a cave. This was a clue, one that had the potential to unlock the long unsolved mystery. The police quickly launched a new investigation into the area, returning to the cave system with forensic experts and search dogs. The location of the items was near the area where Jackson, Miles, and Connor had been last seen, adding to the chilling possibility that these items belonged to them. But even with this newfound evidence, questions began to swirl. Could these items really belong to the missing teens, or was this just an unfortunate coincidence, another lost piece of gear from some other hikers? The authorities were cautious. Cautious because there were no bodies, no direct connection to the boys. The shoes and clothing were important, yes, but they didn't offer enough to make an immediate connection to the teens. The investigation was far from over, but it was a step in the right direction. The discovery brought a glimmer of hope, but also a flood of uncertainty. The forensic team carefully examined the items, looking for anything that might link them definitively to the missing boys. DNA tests, fabric analysis, anything they could find that could confirm the identity of the owners. But even as they tested the materials, there was a lingering doubt. The trail was cold, the evidence scant. Could this be part of the boys' belongings, or was it just another tragic, misplaced clue in a case that seemed to have no end? For the families of the missing teens, the discovery of these items was both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, they now had something tangible, something physical that might finally provide some answers. But on the other hand, the absence of bodies, the lack of concrete evidence, meant that they were still trapped in the same painful limbo they had been in for 5 years. The clothes and shoes might have been the boys', but without the bodies, without the answers they so desperately needed, they were no closer to understanding what had truly happened. The new lead, though, had a ripple effect. It sparked a renewed interest in the case. Investigators returned to the scene, re-interviewing locals, re-examining old evidence. But still, despite all the new attention, nothing concrete emerged. There were theories. Of course, some believed that the boys had fallen into a ravine or been swept away by a river. Others suspected foul play, but the cave and its mysteries only deepened the enigma. The question remained: how had the boys disappeared, and who had been behind it? The discovery in the cave was both a breakthrough and a dead end, providing the first real clue in years, yet still offering no definitive answers. But the search was far from over. What they now had was the possibility of a breakthrough, one that would lead them closer to uncovering the truth. The trail had gone cold, but the flame of hope had not yet been extinguished. For 5 long years, the disappearance of Jackson, Miles, and Connor had plagued their families, the investigation seemingly at a standstill. The mystery of what happened to the 3 teenagers had haunted the Appalachian Mountains, and despite tireless searches and numerous false leads, there had been no breakthrough. Then, in 2022, a revelation came from an unlikely source that would change everything. Ray Waters, an elderly and reclusive man, had lived alone on his property near the caves where the boys' belongings were found. For years, he had been one of many local residents questioned during the initial investigation, but his answers had always seemed ordinary, even innocent. He had claimed to have seen nothing unusual, and no one suspected that the quiet, solitary man could have been involved in such a horrifying crime. However, in the twilight of his life, lying in a hospice bed and suffering from a terminal illness, Waters confessed to the unimaginable. It was a nurse, tending to Waters in his final days, who would become the unexpected witness to his confession. The man, barely conscious and heavily medicated, muttered something that initially seemed incoherent. But as he continued, the words slowly began to make a chilling sense. Waters confessed that in 2016 he had killed the 3 boys when they trespassed on his land. The nurse, at first, did not understand the gravity of the situation. But when Waters mentioned the number of boys and the year, she realized that the confession was connected to the long unsolved case that had captured the public's attention. She immediately reported the confession to the police, who were initially cautious, given Waters' frail condition and the medication he was under. They knew that a confession from a dying man, particularly one influenced by drugs, couldn't be taken as solid evidence. But the mention of specific details, such as the year and the number of teenagers, made them take the claim seriously. They knew they had to investigate further. The police reopened the case, delving into old files and conducting further searches around Waters' property. While they had questioned him back in 2016, they had no reason to suspect him then. He was just another local, known to be somewhat reclusive, but with no criminal background. But now, his confession took on a sinister weight. The police began to investigate the possibility that Waters had been hiding the truth all along. They combed through the evidence once again, this time with a fresh perspective on the case. One of the first steps was to test old physical evidence that had been collected back in 2016. A pair of gloves, found near the spot where the boy's car had been parked, were sent for DNA analysis. Forensic experts were able to extract traces of DNA from all three missing teenagers. The results were conclusive. The DNA found on the gloves matched the boys who had been missing for 5 years. This was the breakthrough the case had desperately needed. Waters' confession, coupled with the DNA evidence, gave the police the confirmation they had been seeking. The truth, long buried in the silence of the mountains, was finally coming to light. While the confession and the DNA results tied Waters to the crime, the full details of what had happened to Jackson, Miles, and Connor remained unclear. What had motivated Waters to kill the three teenagers? Why had he gone to such lengths to conceal his crime, hiding their bodies so carefully that even after years of searching, they had remained undetected? The more the investigators delved into Waters' past, the more they uncovered a man obsessed with his land. Neighbors described him as strange, even paranoid about anyone who came near his property. He was a man who had few connections with the outside world, living a solitary life and fiercely guarding his territory. It seemed that the trespassing of the boys had set off a violent reaction in him, something that had been brewing for years. But no one could have predicted that such an ordinary encounter, a group of teenagers wandering onto his land, would lead to such a brutal and senseless act. The police found that Waters had gone to great lengths to cover his tracks after the murders. He had destroyed the boys' personal belongings, including their phones and backpacks, in a barrel on his property. He had carefully hidden their clothes in the cave, hoping that it would mislead investigators into thinking that the boys had gotten lost or had met with an accident. But his plan had failed. The discovery of the boys' shoes and clothing in the cave had reignited the investigation, and Waters' confession had now sealed his fate. Yet, even with the confession and DNA evidence, many questions still lingered. What had happened to the bodies? Waters had hidden them so well that even the most thorough searches of his property had failed to uncover their location. The police now knew that the bodies were somewhere on his land, but they had no idea where. Waters had taken the secret of their final resting place to his grave. The case of Jackson, Miles, and Connor was now closed, but for their families the pain was far from over. While they had finally received confirmation of what had happened to their children, the search for their bodies and for the full truth would continue. The story of three teenagers who set out on a hike, never to return, had ended in tragedy. But the full horror of what had taken place was still unfolding, piece by piece. The discovery of Ray Waters' confession had finally brought some answers to the families of Jackson, Miles, and Connor, but the search for the full truth was far from over. The case had been a long and painful journey, and despite the closure provided by Waters' confession, there were still so many unanswered questions. After Waters' death, investigators continued to search his property, hoping to uncover more evidence that could shed light on the full scope of his crimes. They turned their attention to an old shed and a well on the land, both of which had been suspiciously ignored during the original investigation. The search was laborious, with teams painstakingly combing through every inch of Waters' property, determined to find the missing pieces of the puzzle. After weeks of digging, their persistence finally paid off. Deep in the well, they made the grim discovery of human remains. The bodies of the three teenagers, whose lives had been stolen 5 years earlier, were finally found. The hope of the families was fulfilled. But the true horror of the crime became even clearer. It was evident that Waters had taken extraordinary measures to conceal his actions, leaving behind only fragmented clues until his confession. Although the case was technically closed, the lingering questions about Waters' motivations, the true extent of his cruelty, and why he had gone to such lengths to cover his tracks still hung heavy. For the families, the pain of losing their children had never truly gone away, but at least now they could lay their sons to rest. If you want to stay updated on true crime stories and mysteries like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon for notifications so you never miss an episode. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think drove Ray Waters to commit such an unspeakable act? Let's keep the conversation going and continue uncovering the truth, one story at a time.